Farm life is the good life. You've got hard work that keeps you in shape. You live off the land, and so you're less dependent on other people. And you see so much weird stuff on a day-to-day basis that you always have a fresh and creepy new campfire story to share with the nieces and nephews and grandkids. I hope you enjoy these allegedly real horror stories that took place on the farm, because they might just make you lose sleep. If you have a scary story of your own, share it with us at darkstories.org. I'm looking for creepy things that have happened where you work, and alleged sightings of cryptids, like the Goat Man. Now then, let's begin. I saw a banshee. From Possibly Impossible. My mom's side of the family is Irish, ridiculously Irish. Growing up, I always had a slight accent, which thickened after spending time with my grandparents. My grandfather is probably the most important person in my life. I love him very much, and was practically his shadow when I was younger. Wherever he was, I was 2 steps behind. Our favorite thing to do together was sitting in front of the fire with our cups of tea and biscuits, and he would tell me stories. Some about his childhood, some works of fiction, some life lessons, and some would be so spooky that I had to sleep on the floor next to his and Nana's bed. But my favorite stories were the stories based on folklore. But which one was my favorite? The Banshee. For those of you who don't know what the legend of the Banshee is, my grandfather explained to me that the Banshee was the full-bodied apparition of a woman, so beautiful it was almost unnatural. Skin pale, with long, bright hair. She had been cursed with the ability to foresee the death of people, and her responsibility with the curse was to be the messenger of death. He would say that if I was to ever hear her crying, or to ever hear her scream, I would know that the life of a loved one would soon be over. Something that he would always make a point to say was that the Banshee was not an evil or malicious spirit. She was simply sick of seeing death, and hated being the one to tell people that death was at hand. I always enjoyed hearing stories about her. I never thought she was real. I was always under the impression that the Banshee was just another work of fiction by my grandpa. But she is real, and I can tell you that. My first encounter with her was when I was 12. Now, I've always been supernaturally sensitive. At least that's what I believe. I used to see my great-grandparents almost every night. My great-nana would tuck me in bed, and my great-pop would hum or whistle till I fell asleep. One day I was at my grandparents' farm, walking around early in the morning with my dog, Bowie. It was winter, so you can imagine it was freezing, probably around 4 or 5 degrees Celsius. So I was bundled up like a little burrito, strolling around the property. Bowie and I were checking on the cows, sheep, and bulls. I'd made a decent amount of distance between the house and myself, so I decided to sit on a rock next to a small stream just in front of the bushland. Not long after doing so, I began to hear a strange noise. I didn't know if it was the wind or a fox, possibly even a guinea fowl. But Bowie had heard it too. A very low growl came from his mouth. I felt a cloud of dread settle into my stomach. I didn't think I was alone anymore, and I knew that something was wrong. I took off my ear covers and pushed my beanie above and behind my ears. The noise was coming from the trees behind me. The only way I can describe what I heard that day is sadness. It sounded like despair. I stood and moved closer to the trees, Bowie showing his protest by growling much louder. The figure of a person emerged from the early morning fog. They were walking. No, they were floating, ever so slowly. The noise was clearer. They were crying like they had just received the most terrible, awful news imaginable. I walked closer. My curiosity got the better of me. The floating figure came closer as well. It was a woman, the most stunningly beautiful woman I'd ever seen, in a long silver evening gown that's seen its fair share of bad days. Her hair was windswept and orange, like a burning fire. Her eyes, however, looked as though they belonged to another person. They were tired, puffy, red, as if they'd been shedding tears every day for the past few decades. Those eyes met mine. They stopped crying for a few seconds. I stared in a trance, and the world around me seemed to have stopped. After the longest minute I'd ever lived through, her mouth opened in a sickeningly inhuman way, and an eardrum-piercing, blood-curdling scream emanated from it. Bowie began to bark and snarl at the woman, then ran off back to the house. But I didn't move. I didn't cover my ears. I stared at her. I wasn't thinking. I don't even know what I was doing. She finally stopped the dreadful scream, not breaking eye contact. She mumbled something under her breath. This is when I got my senses back, and I backed away quickly, turning around and booking it back to the house. When I made it to the gate, I turned around, and she was gone. But I still felt her presence. I shook off my uneasy feeling and ran to find my grandfather. He was carrying wood from the shed to the house. I fell to my knees and I cried to him. I couldn't get out anything but a single sentence. I saw a banshee. A week later, my cousin died in her sleep. Her heart just stopped. Something in the Cornfields, from Sam W27. I was 14 years old and a freshman in high school. My friend had, at the time, recently moved away to a crazy country house that had about 23 acres. It was insanely huge. He used to live in the city with me, but his family wanted a more private life, so my mom had agreed to drive 2 hours to go see them and spend the night. My mom was friends with his mom, so I had never seen his new place and was super excited to see it because I was going with her. We pull up to their address, and the first thing I noticed were the huge cornfields. My friend told me his parents were growing corn for a living, but these were huge, and there were surprisingly a lot of workers, considering the nearest house was about half a mile away. Fast forward to about 1 a.m. My friend and I, who for the purpose of this story I'll call Timothy, were doing the basic 14-year-old stuff, playing video games, eating junk food, etc. But then we hear a bang at my friend's window. I said let's check it out, but he didn't think it was anything worth looking at and wanted us to stay in here. But our parents were asleep, so I said, well, I'm checking it out. You can come with me if you want. I was bluffing because there was absolutely no way I was going to go into the cornfields alone at night. I'd played a lot of Outlast 2 at the time and watched a lot of horror films. Luckily, it worked, and Timothy agreed to go with me. We soon discovered that there are 3 of the workers still in the fields, which is weird because they all leave at 5, and Timothy's dad drives them to a farm where they live. We asked them why they were still here, and they said something I could barely understand. They spoke Spanish, and I was not fluent. They said something along the lines of, "We saw something on our farm, some sort of animal. We came here, waiting to get a call from our brothers to see if they caught it. We'll give you $50 to come help us." At the time, I told Timothy, once we figured out what they'd said, no way, because I was skeptical, and I thought they may try to kidnap us. But Timothy assured me that they had known our family for a while, and they probably came to our house since we were the closest neighbors. Being 14 years old, we both obviously accepted the deal, because even if we didn't find it, they promised to give us each $25. So we hopped into their truck, and we soon made it to their farm. They told us to keep an eye out in the fields, so me and Timothy began to scan around for the next 10 minutes, searching for anything that stood out, anything that moved. All we really had were the flashlights on our cell phones, but apparently that was plenty enough to find the creature that they had been talking about. There, crouching down in one of the many fields, was something that I thought was a bear, but I quickly realized it wasn't. This thing was standing on two legs and was sort of dragging the rest of its body along with itself, with a face that was almost humanoid. Timothy and I began to shout and scream when the family of farmers began running towards us. They quickly saw and began to fire at the animal, but it was long gone, far faster than it looked with its weird body. They quickly told us not to tell our parents and sent us off with $100 each instead of 25. We were happy, but terrified. At the end of the night, we decided that it was best to keep this story to ourselves. I'm staying out of my woods. From Random Persom. This story takes place in Ohio, on a farm where I still live. The incident happened in 2019 when I was 14 years old. I was an atheist, but I still believed in ghosts and things like that, even though I'd never really encountered any paranormal things until now. I'd never thought my house or property was haunted, because my mom and sister would say crazy things, like we had a spirit of a goat in our living room. I thought that was nonsense. I'd been living in that house with my family for years, with no incident. My most terrifying experience happened in July, when my sister came into the living room, shaking while she spoke of a demonic entity being in the woods. I would have thought she was crazy, but she seemed so traumatized, I had to believe her, though I didn't want to. The following morning at 2:49, I was feeling brave, and I wanted to see if I would encounter anything weird. So I went deep into the forest with a flashlight and some fresh batteries. I also brought a pocket knife and my fully charged phone, just in case what my sister actually saw was some creepy person. As soon as I had entered the forest, I felt a little uneasy, but I kept going for about 20 minutes. I was a natural speed walker, able to get far enough into the woods in that time that I could no longer see a trace of my home. I freaked out a little, to be honest, and I began to walk in the direction I thought my house was. I was walking slowly now, though, as my uneasiness grew. When I stopped again, I felt as if I was being watched. When I turned, I didn't see anything, but my flashlight did begin to flicker. It then suddenly turned off. I frantically tried to turn it back off when I heard voices, whispering, seemingly coming from nowhere but everywhere at once. I soon began to realize that this voice didn't sound right. It didn't sound human at all, and what it was saying sent chills throughout my body.
You're going to die.
When my flashlight finally turned back on, I saw something. a 6-foot-tall figure, wearing tattered black clothes. Its eyes were sunken in, and it had pale skin. It donned a smile with black teeth, and it appeared to float rather than stand. I was frozen in place, and as it got closer, the whole forest seemed to get darker and colder. Desperate, I then remembered my pocket knife. I pulled it out and threw it at him, but it went right through him as if he wasn't there. I think this made it more angry. The whispering grew louder and louder, and it began to move around me. I finally gathered the courage to move, and I started running. Somehow I managed to make it back to the tree line at home, but I didn't stop, not in the slightest. I ran harder until I made it to the back porch, and only then did I look back. That thing was standing at the edge of the trees, staring at me, raising a bony, pale finger, pointing it at me. I could have sworn I heard it speak a warning.
After dark, these woods are not yours.
Ever since then, whenever I looked out into those woods at night, I watch for a figure that stands there and stares. One time, when I looked for too long, I got a nosebleed, and so far, I've never ventured back in those woods at all. It wasn't a coyote. From Just Call Me Red. As I'm typing this, I'm still a little shaky from what happened, and now I need to know what my cousin and I just saw in the pasture. Let it be known I've always had an attraction to cryptid lore, especially my family's Cherokee folklore and legends. Sadly, we don't have any living relatives on the reservation, nor do we live close. We live in a small town in rural East Texas. I say in town, but more like 30 miles out. Let me ask you this. Has anyone else seen coyotes behaving really strange? Like not normal coyote strange, but hair-raising, bad feeling before you see it kind of strange. Let me elaborate. I just walked outside, didn't turn on the house spotlights, but I had a really weird feeling. I then noticed it was completely silent outside. No crickets, no frogs, no night sounds at all, and Ellie, my dog, would not come out of the house. So I grabbed my spotlight, and I decided to do a sweep of our back pasture to see if I could see what was wrong. The layout of our yard is quite simple. Our pipe fence is about 30 to 35 feet from our house, all the way around from when we had cows to keep them out of the yard. We keep it pretty well lit up to keep animals away. Our property is about 150 acres of woods and cow pasture that butts up against our neighbor's 1,500 hunting club, which is pretty much dense woods, connecting on both sides to 2 other hunting clubs. It's pretty much a crap ton of dark woods. I shined the flashlight, and the first thing I saw was this massive coyote, like abnormally big, sitting about 15 feet from the porch. It's just sitting there and staring. Now I've dealt with coyotes a lot, and they usually bolt when they get spotted. They never come within 50 feet of the fence. I stood there staring at this thing for a good 5 minutes before slowly backing up, with this creature still not moving. So I turned on the floodlights on the house, and I booked it inside to get Ethan, my cousin. When the 2 of us came back out, this animal had walked out of the fence and was just walking at a slow pace, about 10 feet past the fence. So we set up a gun, spotted it with the light, and as soon as the light hit it, the creature just stopped and stared at us. Its eyes were really unnerving, because they reflected differently than a coyote's should. We took 4 shots. The first one hit right in the back, and he stumbled a bit, moving in a circle like it was just shaking off a pesky bug, before taking off at a slow trot. It was moving closer to the fence, letting us hit it 3 more times before my mare came squealing at it. She hates coyotes and has stopped them in the past whenever we had calves on the ground. But when she got close, she did an about turn, then booked it away faster than I'd ever seen her. We lost sight of the coyote in the tall grass. Literally, as soon as we lost sight of it, everything came to life again. Bugs, crickets, and all the night sounds. I grabbed my dog and she booked it outside. I guess she was suddenly brave. She ran straight to where we'd first seen the thing sitting, and she went rigid, every hair on her back standing up. She snarled as she traced it through the pasture, but came back when she got about right past the fence where we hit it. Coyotes have been acting strange lately, but nothing like that. Usually I don't get unnerved by coyotes, but this literally had me frozen with that feeling that something was dangerously wrong. Keep your eyes peeled, and keep your animals inside. We sure as heck are keeping the cat indoors, and I'm glad they've had their shots. And I'll be forward with you. I'm a pretty stout gal, 20 years old and 5'2", a little heavy, who spent her entire life in the backwoods. I'm used to dealing with dangerous animals, and I've never in my life been as scared as I was then. My cousin is 19, 6 feet tall and 200 pounds. He spent most of his life in the hood in Houston, and has come so close to death so many times he's not afraid of much, especially when he's got a gun in his hands. Update. About 2 days after this happened, it came back. My cousin and I were out checking the hog traps at the back of the property in my dad's farm truck. I was sweeping the pasture with our mounted light while Ethan reset the trap. Our back pasture from fence to fence is probably 800 yards to 600 yards, and it's pretty clear after we did some timber cutting a few years back. The moon was full that night, and so we could see pretty good. It was all calm as Ethan came back to the truck, my dog sniffing around the trap. As Ethan reached the truck, we both noticed the woods go silent, just like 2 nights before. There was nothing. Even my dog had stopped and began barking and snarling before booking it, yelping to the truck. He jumped into the cab with us through the open window. We quickly both swung the mounted lights toward the direction she came from and spotted the same monster coyote standing there. We were maybe 7 to 8 feet away from it, so we were most certainly sure it was the same coyote, abnormally large, glaring right at us. As we stared at it, I was slowly reaching for the shotgun we kept stored behind the seat before that thing. I don't want to call it a coyote, because I don't think that's what it was. It lifted its head and let out that sound like a mixture of a human screaming and a deep roar. There's no way a coyote can make a sound like that. My cousin slammed the truck into reverse, doing a near 180 in the grassy pasture. We peeled out of there down the trail leading to the house. All the while, this thing just kept screaming, unafraid of our large vehicle. We didn't slow down until we were in our garage. Then we booked it into the house, into the bedroom, the only place I had window blinds as well as blackout curtains. I don't know what that thing was, but now my cousin wants to get some local hunters together with their hunting dogs to go after it. I won't be going into those woods for a while, and I'll never go alone again if I ever do. The Flying Head from a viewer with the username TheAsianGuy. I'm from Southeast Asia, specifically Cambodia. This story is from my grandma. Back when she was a little kid, the country was under control by Pol Pot, the guy that killed over 2 million people. Her family was separated during the time, since the red people, as we call them, like to separate children and adults. And as my gram was a kid, she was tasked with picking fruits and vegetables on a farm somewhere on the outskirts of the village. Near that farm was a small river where the red people dumped dead workers, who either starved or were beaten to death as a warning to the children. One day she was sent off really early with a bunch of other kids to collect fruits. She said it was probably somewhere between 4 or 5 in the morning, which was unusual for them, but they carried on anyway. The group was around 30 kids, with a few guards armed with guns and hatchets. After maybe a few minutes of walking from the village, they made it on the path. I should say here that the village was surrounded by forest and farmland, so the walk to the fruits farm took around 5 to 10 minutes. The red people did this so villagers wouldn't be able to sneak out at night and steal fruits or vegetables without being caught. After they made it onto the path, my grandma said she felt dread and fear out of nowhere. She said that the kids around her looked scared as well, but they were told to keep moving anyway by the guards. After a few minutes of walking, they began to hear a strange sound, like something was chewing, gnawing on meat. It was coming from over the river. As they got closer, they started to become really scared, and some kid even began to cry. It was at this point the guards knew something was wrong, so they started to walk closer to the river to see what was going on. To her horror, my grandma saw one of the guards beginning to scream, shooting at something. Then she saw the thing that made her vow to not go anywhere near that river ever again. There she was, standing on the path looking at this human head with intestines dangling out of its neck. It looked like a woman's head with gray hair, but the worst detail was the stuff in its mouth. She said the darn thing was eating one of the corpse's intestines. The head managed to get away, but ever since then, the guard began taking a different path through the forest. Anyone who wanted to take that path needed permission from the village chief. A few weeks after that incident, she said some poor kid who was caught sneaking fruits under his shirt was beaten in front of everyone to show what would happen to thieves. He was then sent off to be executed. They were told by the village chief to dispose of him in the river. The guards were scared at first because of the flying head incident, but after being accused of not being loyal to the village chief, they went anyway. After that, everyone was sent off to their huts. Not even a few minutes rolled by, and my gram said she heard a gunshot. After a few minutes, she heard footsteps, running, and panicked screaming and panting. They found out early in the morning after that night, while the guard was walking the kid down to the river. The guards had heard a whooshing noise and saw the head thing flying straight at them, eyes glowing red. They began to fire at it, running away back to the village, where they realized they forgot the kid. No one ever saw him again, though. They believed that the head got him. After that, the red people just put up a fence there, trying to forget it never happened. A few years after the terror of Pol Pot, Cambodia was freed, and my grandma got to reunite with her family, though she never told anyone until recently, when me and my cousins asked her about her time during the Red Era. I hope you enjoyed the story, and if you're curious, the creature she saw is called the She found out after reuniting with her family that they were pretty common among the rural area of Cambodia. They were said to feast on intestines. The head are those of a witch, usually in their 40s, who are seeking revenge on someone. A Goblin Under the House, from Dragonlord. It was 1989. I was at my grandmother's house. It was almost June, and I'd gone to my great-grandma's farm for the summer. This farm had been in the family for over 100 years, and was about 150 acres. Every year when I would go to stay with my grandparents, my grandpa would always tell me that a goblin lived under the house, and that it would come out and steal animals or eggs. As far back as I can remember, my grandmother would lay out a rooster chicken and 2 hard-boiled eggs on a tray by an oddly shaped hole leading under the house, and sure enough, it would all be gone in the morning. Even when I was younger, I always thought my grandparents were telling me tall tales. They were setting the food out to keep the fox in the woods away from the chickens. That's what my child mind said. One night I'd left some stuff out in the barn, so I finished everything Grandma had set out for me to do. Then I went out to the barn to clean up. As I stepped out the door to the house and started toward the barn, I came by the odd hole under the house. I had an old flashlight from the 70s, and curious, I shined it into the hole where Grandma had laid the food. I saw it. There was something in there hunched over the tray. It was short and brownish green, with long, droopy ears. It was eating the food Grandma had left out, not paying attention to me whatsoever. I turned off the flashlight and hid behind the outhouse that was still on the property. After a bit, the creature stood up and started to look around, making groans and all sorts of weird sounds. Not paying attention, I started backing up, and I backed right into it. The electric fence, that is. I let out a scream, causing that thing to turn around and look right at me. So I ran. I ran as fast as I could back to the front door with this ugly little beast right on my feet. Luckily, I was able to get in the house without a scratch. And after that, I never went outside after dark at my grandma's house. Skinwalker on My Farm, from Copenhagen, 1822. I live in southern Indiana with my Uncle Steve. We have a 300-acre farm with plenty of woods. It was during the summer. I was working late hours in the fields. I went out early in the morning to round up our herd of cattle to come in for a drink of cold, fresh water, and when I was walking behind them, I would count to see if they were all there. I was bringing in a herd of 30 cows, but this time I counted 29. I went ahead and brought them in, then went to tell my uncle that we were missing number 225. We went to look for her because we knew we had to find her. She was due for a calf that month, so we searched and searched. But then, I smelled something horrible. I about puked. When I found what the smell was, I hollered for my uncle. He came right over and saw it too. Cow 225 was torn apart. It looked like some huge, nasty animal got a hold of it. But my uncle said it was probably just coyotes. But how? 225 had always been an aggressive cow, and it never would let anyone or anything get near her herd. Plus, it looked as if whatever killed her did it for sport and not food. Everything had been left. So we went and got our old crappy farm truck, loaded her up and buried her. The following night, I had my best friend over, who wanted to help us on the farm. We were in the field at dusk fixing fences for breaks or sags. It was going to take us from dawn to 11 that night to do the whole property. So my buddy went to go get some drinks back at the house, about 3 miles away. He walked the whole distance instead of taking the truck, as we were using the headlights to help fix the fence. It's not an easy task. About 10 minutes go by, and I hear my uncle in the direction of the woods about 20 yards away. It was his voice, saying the same thing he had said earlier, about,
"Must have been coyotes that got her."
I froze in my tracks. The voice was a bit deeper than my uncle's, actually. I shined the flashlight toward the direction of the voice, and what reflected back were a set of yellow eyes about 7 or 8 feet off the ground. Then my friend came from behind me with a flashlight, shining it at whatever it was, and asked what was wrong. As he did that, I nearly soiled myself, and I heard him drop the water bottles. There behind the big oak tree was this huge thing. It was so tall, with long and skinny arms and human-looking hands. Its fingernails were long and sharp, and the skin on its torso was so tight, its ribs were showing. It had a face that I just can't forget. It was shaped like a deer's. I was thinking in my head we needed to run to the truck, but I didn't say it out loud. I thought it. But I heard that voice again, replying to that thought.
"I wouldn't do that if I were you."
I nearly screamed, and I ran to get back in the truck. My friend and I jumped in, started it, and I sharply turned the wheel, slinging dirt and rock. The headlights hit this thing. I noticed it wasn't on all fours, but it was standing there like a man. I floored the truck as hard as I could, but I wasn't prepared for the next part. When I looked in the rear view, I saw this thing chasing after the truck, and my heart nearly gave out when the truck suddenly died. Luckily, it started again after a couple of tries. I floored it once more, and we somehow made it home. Back at home, we threw the front door open. My uncle's girlfriend looked at us in shock, asking what the rush was about. We told her, and once we calmed down, she said, "It sounds like a skinwalker. My grandma used to tell me all about 'em." Well, whatever that thing was, I'll never work or go near that place again. If you're living in southern Indiana, be careful out there, and make sure your cattle are safe. Well, that brings us to the end of this Darkness Prevails episode, but I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like and share the episode with a friend or family member, and if you have a story, share it with us at darkstories.org. To let us know what kind of stories you want to hear next, comment below. And until next time, here are the credits to my amazing patrons who have donated in the past or continue to donate. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.